March 7th, the National Board met in person in Dearborn, Michigan for our biannual meeting. We had the audacity to plan Convention 2020 in a beautiful Tucson, Arizona resort with the theme 2020 Vision, Focus on Our Future. And within about 2 weeks, the world radically changed. Our lives were filled with more questions than answers. And yet I think focusing on our future of our chapters and taking time to look for answers is one of the most important things we can do. Perhaps it's the perfect opportunity to take time to ask questions about how we can bring our chapters together and move forward into late 2020 and greater and stronger into 2021. Dwight Eisenhower said, "I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is essential." So things always change, and we sure found that out this year. And Ben Franklin quipped, "If you fail to plan, you are planning to fail." I think they are both saying that creating a culture of discipline and intention is part of our leadership team and is part of our leadership teams and committees, especially because we're all volunteers. We can do better at what we do best in our communities, and that's, of course, serve children in need. I'm here today with Eileen Meyer, a retired federal prosecutor, but she's also a current DC Christ Child Society board member and a member of several nonprofits in the DC area. So, hi, Eileen.
Hello.
And I just wanted to say that I think the number one question that the national office and our national board members get from our chapters is how to get members to step up and say yes to leadership positions, especially to be president or the head of a very large fundraiser. So what are some things that chapters can do to create a culture of yes at taking a turn to leadership?
Molly, that's the age-old problem to which, unfortunately, there's really no easy answer. But I've thought about it over the last few days since we had our original talk, and I do have some ideas that I'm happy to share with you. First of all, I think it's really important for our leadership to model the fact that being a leader is a really rewarding experience. And making sure that people beneath them understand that it's not, you're not there left all by yourself trying to do the job. That's why we have lots of people in the organization. There's people behind you, and they have your back. So it's not going to be a one-person event. I think that one really good way to try to get people more at ease with the idea of being a leader is to let them get involved in smaller things. Ask a person to be on a committee, or give them a small special project, like perhaps feeding some of your families in a pandemic, something like that. It shows them that being a leader, running something, is a doable task, and that they can do it. It gives them a chance to test their own moxie. The other thing that I think is really important is to make sure that your organization has a group that whose job it is to maintain a list and always have their eye out for the future leaders. It could be a trustee committee. It could be, in DC, we have something called the nominating committee, which is chaired by our immediate past president, who's had a long time to observe the organization and see who the people that are coming up that could be put into leadership. It means, and having a group like that means that nobody is starting from scratch when it comes to trying to figure out who is going to be put into the next leadership positions. And then the other thing is testing people to help make sure that not only do we have people on the bus, but we have people on the bus in the right seats. And be assured that none of this is a single year event. All of this is information that's gathered over time and passed on from one generation of leaders to the next. So finally, knowing that, it's always important for the leaders, I think, to have in the back of their mind, when you meet people in the organization, what job would that person be good for? because there's always a job out there that can teach somebody that they can be a great leader.
Right. Oh, I think so too. You know, I'm blessed to be in the Columbus chapter that's really always taken its cues from the member resources provided by National. And so as a member and a leader, I knew I didn't have to come up with everything on my own. I didn't have to have all the answers. There was a lot of resources available to me, you know, back in the day before the website was so robust. It was kind of a big notebook, but it still worked. And it's what we use, the chapter, what we used to call the OMG or the Oh My God, it's now the chapter guide. And but as a leader on a board, there might be 4 pages that apply to you. It's not that whole book. And so you can really hone in on some basic suggestions on how to get things done and how to organize yourself. And I think that that's really kind of a key role the National can play to help chapters get those leaders in place. Columbus too has a nominating committee, and I'm sure that that board structure is part of what National recommends, chaired by the past president. And, you know, as you said, she's always had this vision of people who have stepped up, people who have said yes, people who have done a great job. Another person that's oftentimes on the nominating committee is the membership chair, or the person who's bringing in new members and leading them through their provisional years, because they really get to know people, and in a way that you know, that they have some real good suggestions for that committee. And maybe the project chair, if they're observing and getting reports and communication from all the project leaders, you know, they're again really getting to know some of the members who have stepped up in at least in some way to say yes. So that really, you know, helps with that foundation and framework. So,
you know, I had one other thought too, and
sure.
that is, we are a national organization. I think that last time I heard there were 44 chapters around the country.
I think we're getting closer to 45, so we're
great.
We're growing, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, but if you look around the country, there's bound to be a chapter that's just like yours.
Right.
And you know, because we have a national office, it's a phone call away to call to the national office, call to Maura, and say, I need somebody to talk to about how do I deal with this situation? And chances are there's somebody who's dealt with it. So share resources, you know, reach out and get help, not just written help, but call somebody up and say, how did you deal with this? Or what do I do here? And you know, chances are somebody's dealt with it, and you should not have to reinvent the wheel. Figure out, you know, what they try to find somebody else who's dealt with it and use their examples.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the things that we it's put in place this year, and so it's really just started, is what we call a chapter liaison program. So each board member is assigned just a role to communicate with a chapter, each chapter member. So each board member has 4 chapters or so, and some of them are close to them in proximity. Some of them, you know, some of them know people in certain chapters. It doesn't matter, but that's part of a level of communication that we're trying to break down any barriers and open up communication. And again, I'm gonna need a drink here. Again, make sure that people don't feel like they're alone.
Right. That's great. That's really foresightful planning on the part of National.
So we're talking about chapter leadership, and you talked a little bit about this, my favorite little book, called Good the Great from the Social Sector by Jim Collins. And he talks about, his nomenclature is funny, but it makes sense. He talks about getting the right people on the bus and getting the right people in the right places. And so can you kind of help expand again a little bit on some of your advice for that?
Yeah, you know, everybody has a different strength. And I think that the most important thing is to identify what people's strengths are, but then also to identify where you need people. What seats do you have on your bus, and what kind of person do you need to fill that seat? And it can be different in any given year, depending on what, what your organization is doing that year. If they're, special emphasis on fundraising, or special emphasis on strategic planning, or whatever you're facing. And
well, am I correct, Eileen, in that someone from the DC chapter knew you were retiring and perhaps a little more available, and reached out to you and said, won't you join us? We need you.
Right. And they knew that I had some experience especially doing board development in other areas. And that I actually, the nerd that I am, I actually think it's really interesting.
I have a little bit of that nerd streak too.
Yeah. They reached out and asked me to do things that, focus on that. So it's really a matter of, everybody kind of pulling toward your same goal, which is meeting your mission.
Right, absolutely.
You have to look for your big picture people. You have to look for your fundraisers. There are a lot of people who say, absolutely, I won't do that. But there's a lot of people who have no problem with cold calling, or, reaching out to that foundation in your area. You have to have the worker bee, the person who's going to be there stuffing the envelopes. And you also have to have a detail-oriented people who won't let things get by. How we're going to get there. Exactly.
And so, yes, you're right. That mix of people. One of the things that I was thinking about, and I recently listened to an interview with Jim Collins, and he talked about, and I think I can think about the presidents that I've experienced in the Columbus Christ Child Society. Their personalities were so different, and their leadership styles. We got the things done that needed to be done. The boards came together and worked together, but their leadership styles, if you observed them, were different, and their personalities as they led meetings and things like that were very different. And so he talked about, and I think this is really important in a volunteer organization where leadership is rotating and board membership is rotating, to not be dissuaded from saying yes by thinking I'm not charismatic enough, or I don't want to talk in front of people. I'm not that person. But that's not what drives the organization. It's the mission that is the charism. It's the mission that attracts people. It's the mission. If you can learn to express what the mission of your chapter is, and everybody can learn to do that. Everybody can learn to put a little elevator speech together, and because it's really in our hearts, it's already there. We can all express the mission. Then that's the message that brings new members and new leaders all the time. It's not the charism of a member who may not be in the same position in 2 years.
Right. I actually listened to that myself, and he says, if you have a charismatic cause, you don't need a charismatic leader. Right.
And I really think we do.
Right. And in the DC chapter, we think that the elevator speech is so important that we've actually made little cards with the elevator speech on it, so that you don't have to think for the first 3 floors, oh, what am I supposed to say? You've got something, you can practice it, and it does come from the heart for so many people. So you don't even need that.
Right, absolutely. Well, a few years ago, National was blessed with a bequest, and we had some money to invest in a communications plan. And part of that project, we came up with something that we call the brand values matrix, and it expresses in phrases important ways that Christ Child Society serves members, people, its leaders, etc. And it's set up on a little grid, and so sometimes I think people look at it and kind of go cross-eyed and go, what in the world is this? But if you are a person that is looking for the way to, if you're in any position where you're writing things about Christ Child Society, or you're talking about Christ Child Society, or you're a board member, finding a couple of those phrases that speak to you that you can then personalize it kind of cuts down the, you know, the level of the work that you have to do to put those phrases together. You know, again, it's another tool the National provides. You don't have to make up the words. There's some words and suggestions, and then make them yours.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
so you don't have to start from scratch. You don't have to make it up. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Exactly.
And so one more thing for this little time of our conversation. Do you have any favorite books or resources? We both have said we're a little nerdy about this, and we like to learn about leadership and running organizations and things like that. Do you have any favorite resources that you could pass on to some of our members?
Well, the first thing I have is, and I have a copy of it here, is it's called the Trustee Handbook. And it's actually, it's printed every year by the NAIS, the National Association of Independent Schools. So it's a school source.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But it's got some really great basic information about boards and, fiduciary responsibilities and all the things that we have to worry about, and about how do you develop your board, how do you staff your board, that kind of thing. So that's number one. Number two, we've talked about Jim Collins and his books, From Good to Great and Great by Choice. And I think that they're required reading by anybody who's interested in this thing. And then you've turned me on to this, to the podcast and the blog by Joan Gary from Joan Gary Consulting. She's the one who was interviewing Jim
Right.
Collins. And she is really hitting the nail on the head. You can find all sorts of good, interesting, 30-minute, 20-minute, 30-minute, 40-minute podcasts that just will keep your interest and really, I think, put some things in your head, maybe not answer exact questions, but give you some good resources for how do you deal with whatever problem arises.
Another person that I like to listen to that really has a positive message is a gal called Gail Perry, and her business is called Fired Up Fundraising. And so the focus is usually on fundraising, but it's just been so positive. And right now she's been doing these live broadcasts on Facebook, and then if you get on her email list, you if you don't listen live, you get an opportunity to listen to the recording. And she, like Gail, or like Joan, Gail like Joan, is interviewing other experts in the field. So you're constantly being introduced to other people who have specific expertise on whatever the topics are that they seem to be covered. Another book that I read, and I kind of like the resources from this guy because I think he adds a grounding and framework to fundraising because his ground and framework is very faith-based. And so as an organization that calls itself the Christ Child Society, to think of our fundraising grounded in faith rather than business tactics, kind of brings it to a different focus. And so it really helps, again, focus on the right things. Our mission, what are we working towards? How do we explain that mission? And how do we attract people, to that? And he has a very long name that you might not remember. It's Brice, B-R-I-C-E, Zokolowski. But his website is much simpler. It's called catholicfundraiser.net. And so he was very smart in making his website easy to remember. So I think we're good for now for this conversation. And I just wanted to see if you had any last words.
No, I think that I hope that this conversation has made people feel like it's not an insurmountable task to be a leader or to find new leaders in Christ Child, because I think ultimately everybody is there because they have a passion for the mission, and you're going to find the right people that you need.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to say thanks to Eileen Meyer from our Washington, D.C. chapter. It's been great to get to know you, at least in this kind of weird way, in this weird time, but also to remind all of you to look for more details about continuing this discussion with some other chapter leaders later in the fall. So thank you, Eileen.
Thank you.